So welcome, and yeah, thanks to everyone for inviting me. I've never spoken at a Green Jam before, so it's my inaugural event. And so let's find a button that moves forward. Here we go. So a little bit about me. I'm an ex-agency owner. I built an agency in the period we affectionately call the noughties. And that agency, I'll explain the story a bit later on, but came part of a bigger group, which is now owned by Dentsu. Today, I'm the CEO of a growth consultancy called Cactus. We help agencies scale up. I'm the author of Agencyphonics, which is a book aimed to help agency founders and leaders in the early stages. It's almost like, think of it as the grassroots side of agency life. I focus much of my effort these days on the now, next, and future of agencies. And so in those early stages, trying to support them with paying it forward almost, as well as helping them with knowledge. I was just speaking to Graham just then, saying that some of the knowledge gets lost over time around building agencies, and I try to sort of find all those nuggets and tips and things and share them so that the future agencies don't have to learn by making the same mistakes. Not for profit support community. Agencyphonics now is basically a community which has about 1,200 agency founders in. Oh, I missed out. I'm also the host of a podcast show on YouTube and on Spotify and iTunes, which is called Agencyphonics, where I interview people around agency life. And I'm also an investor in the Alliance of Independent Agencies, which really cements kind of my commitment to supporting the independent agency sector. I used to, way back when, sit on the board of the MAA, was a massive fan of all the work it did. And obviously when Graham and Clive contacted me to get back involved, I was delighted to do that. And on a personal note, I live in sunny Hampshire, or not so sunny today. I'm into hydroponics, growing stuff with water, the good life, for those of you old enough to remember the TV show. I do a bit of snowboarding, a bit of mountain biking. I've got a canal near me, so I do a bit of kayaking as well, poker and long walks as well. This is a copy of the new book, which is about to come out. I think the launch date for the new book is going to be around sort of late August, early September. It's a revised version of the first book. And I think even if you don't actually own an agency, or you're not looking to set one up, and a lot of my friends who run larger agencies have actually bought loads of copies and given it to their team members, because I think there are so many small nuggets in there that would just help anyone just to get a better understanding beyond their role of what it's like trying to run an agency, and also some of the other factors that people need to consider and think about on the bigger picture. And it might give you more insight to what it's like for the other leaders inside your agency. So yeah, as I mentioned, Cactus is a leading agency growth consultancy. And what we do is we try and sort of cover the whole area of an agency life, from sort of sales to people and culture, organizational structures. And we've been very fortunate over the last 10 years. We've probably helped, well, we have helped in excess of 1,000 agencies, and some of the fast agencies growing in the UK right now we work with. Someone once said to me that, you'll have 3 careers in your lifetime and one hasn't been invented yet. I've been working for 22 years in agencies, and I've been working for 34 years now, which I know I don't look old enough to have worked that long, but I left school at 16. I left home at 15 with no qualifications. And my message always today is that, everyone who's here today has probably got more qualifications than I have. So your career path should certainly go well in excess of mine. But I've seen history repeat itself time and time again. One of the benefits of working so long is that actually I've seen the same mistakes happen time and time again. And when Clive and Graham and Terry asked me to speak today, I thought probably the one thing I would like to really share, especially as it's for many people working within agencies themselves, is just try and share, I think for me, what one of the most important lessons that I basically fear could happen again, but just share with you generally some tips and tricks around what I think it would take today to future-proof your career. I always hedge. There's a lot of stuff in here that's bloody obvious, and I'm expecting you to know a lot of it, especially people who've taken the time to tune in. to this tonight, because you're probably the smarter ones, the people who are investing in knowledge, who are investing in their future. But as always, there'll probably be one thing in there that you'll learn and you'll take away. So don't worry. If you think it's obvious, there'll still be some gems in there. So I wanted to start by just reminding everybody what is an agency, because although we all work in agencies and work with agencies, this often gets forgotten. You know, we think ourselves as advertising or marketing or PR. We think that we're creative, we're innovative. But actually, when you drill it and strip it right back, agencies are simply companies who solve a range of specialist problems as an outsourced partner to companies, to brands that cannot do these things because they don't have the knowledge, the skills, or resources internally to resolve. So they use agencies to solve the problems that they cannot solve themselves internally. And as the services that we offer as agencies become more automated, more commoditized, or are taken in-house, agencies, we need to move up the value chain. We can't just sit still because our business would not exist. We have to move up to new areas where new problems need to be solved, or we need to deliver other services that just can't be procured as competitively, because let's say maybe there are 1 million companies out there right now building websites. Therefore, the price of building websites within agencies has plummeted in the last five years or so now, because we have, tools such as Squarespace or Wix and things that can automate and make those. People can recruit web developers into their offices. So we need to make sure that we're continually moving forwards. And so at the heart of everything I talk about today, this is a really important thing for everyone just to remember, that the business they work in is not something that will necessarily stick around for a long time. So why do you need to future-proof your agency career? Well, for me, the story starts probably in 1991, because up until that point, we'd had 300 years of agencies pretty much doing the same 6 or 7 services. But in 1991, Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web as we know it. And I'm a 22-year-old at that stage. And it's about 2 years in, and suddenly word is getting out about this potential new way for computers to communicate with each other and information to share with each other. And in my spare time, and I was working in retail at the time, in my spare time, I got a computer, I bought a modem, I'd spend 6 hours a night trying to connect to the internet. And over the next few years, I learned about web pages. I learned how to build them in my spare time, because I anticipated and could see the impact that this would have on the world. I invested in my future beyond where I currently was. So 1999, a few years later, this is the Purple Shed, where I started my first agency after being made redundant twice and go through 3 jobs in 1 year. And in 1999, I started building websites. It was still a few years later, after Tim Berners-Lee had invented the internet. But I want to remind everyone, and this is at the heart of what I'm going to say today, but in 2000, the year 2000, I got married. I share this story quite a lot, which is my father-in-law stood up and introduced me as Spencer, who works in the internet business, and the whole room laughed out loud, because in the year 2000, the internet was a joke, a bit like probably Dogecoin, maybe for some people today. It was a fad. It was something that was never going to be big, because it was overly hyped, and we shortly saw the crash of lastminute.com and boo.com and the stock market crash and everything around it, and it was a fad. But when we forward it 21 years later, there isn't a person in the world now whose life probably isn't, on a daily basis affected by what happens on the internet. So I've seen a lot of fads over the years. I built my first mobile site in the year 2001. Everyone told me that was just a fad. I was on social media, was invented in 2004, and I started talking about it, and everyone told me that was a fad. When I first got my iPhone, everyone said, "Oh, that's just a fad." Apple Watches, if you Google it, they were fads. Pay-per-click, actually. I remember in 2002 being asked by a client for a case study on why they should bid on sponsored links at the top of search engines. And the argument was no one would ever click on them. And Google is what, virtually $1 trillion business today based on just that one thing alone. But we've seen it all, whether it be virtual reality or augmented reality or crypto, even electric cars. When I first got on my electric car, 5 years ago, someone said, oh, it's just a fad. No one's going to drive around in cars where they don't have any engine noise. Everyone loves the sound of engines in cars. And so the fads have been quite central to a lot of the things that have happened over the last few years. When I jump back to the 2007, 8, 9 recession, there were some really big lessons learned. Okay, so the people that lost their jobs at that stage were the people who hadn't kept up with the changes that had happened from, with the internet. And although most of you here now probably may or may not have been working during that period, what happened was all of the large agencies had forgotten or had really not really handled it very well, bringing technology into their traditional models. And most people who worked in agencies saw the internet department almost like the dark arts department, and a lot of the creatives, account managers. I've worked with lots of these people, and they just didn't want to learn about it. They didn't want to understand what was new. They didn't want to take any time to invest in understanding either, and they didn't anticipate that they would be made redundant because they hadn't done that. But the reality was that when the recession came along, and probably this is the last recession, we can talk about the pandemic in a minute, but actually what happened was all of those people who got made redundant, they all went away, and they realized that they missed everything, and they retrained as social media experts and digital marketeers, and they all came back with a vengeance, but they all lost their job. Let's say they all, but a lot of them lost their jobs in the meantime. And this happened because people didn't take the time to invest in their future. Okay. And that might seem like a bit of an obvious story, but what I'm trying to make sure that everyone who's listening to this today understands, that whoever you are, whether you're running a business or you're working in a business, if you don't invest in the now, next, and future of your agency services and your role, you're going to get commoditized at some point, and you're probably going to get made redundant. And unless you're able to to adapt and to be able to deliver the services that your agency will pivot into organically over time, to keep up with the demands of the clients who are always looking for their agencies to procure things that they cannot solve themselves in-house, or they cannot find cheaper people to do that. So more recently, we started to see history repeat itself. By 2015, 16, it was obvious that every business was now a technology company. And the thing that most of us who don't work in technology day to day, well, most people who don't work in understand, is that technology doesn't change, it doesn't evolve linearly, it doubles. Technology, the rate of pace of change of technology is exponential. It is moving at such a fast rate that that all of a sudden people weren't quite realizing that those changes would lead very quickly to new demands of customers. And for the first time in business history, technology became ahead, was more advanced than the business needs. Up until that point, businesses were never able to get the technology or the infrastructure that they needed or they demanded. Technology always followed business, but now it started to go ahead. And we started to see these headlines around that period. And actually I did a talk, I'm pretty sure I did a talk into the MAA around this time. And I showed these slides back then. These are all slides from 2017, where, it was talking about brands taking everything in-house again. It was the end of the agencies as we know it. It was, the shock and the horror of consultancies coming in and buying up agencies and reshaping the world. And actually, even as recent as last year, there was an article in Campaign saying account management will be squeezed out of agencies. And so all of a sudden, we were starting to see this commoditization happen again, and this threat coming in because of the changes. But actually, I think everyone was pretty fortunate in some ways that the pandemic arrived. Now, when I say everyone was fortunate, obviously a lot of people had a horrific time with the pandemic. And a lot of people in agencies were in the wrong sectors. They were unfortunately working in things like hospitality, or they were working in with high street retailers, live events. And I have clients who were in those spaces. And yeah, it was tough. But the majority, in two surveys I ran, over 80% of agencies actually grew or stayed the same last year. And most of the agencies I work with today are growing at an incredible rate. And the reason why I think the pandemic actually saved many agencies was because when history has started to repeat itself again, people weren't changing, weren't adapting. I've been banging on about this for the last 3-4 years, and there were so many people still behind the curve. But all of a sudden, COVID meant that consumers moved even more online. McKinsey reported that COVID-19 had accelerated digital transformation, and that's the way that all of us interact with digital when we buy services or we market services by 7 years, the products and services that we use, by 7 years. And it was difficult last year, but what was wonderful was that the fear of survival drove a really good behavior, which was all of a sudden everyone had a bit of fear, and they were pivoting, and they were going, well, where do people need help? As an agency, what services do people want now? And actually everyone mucked in. Yes, there were a lot of furloughs, and yes, there was a lot of, again, a lot of tough times happening, but I saw new behaviors come out of people in teams learning new skills, new services. And we saw a massive boom, for example, in direct to consumer, where retail had been affected, a massive shift to online events, where live events were being disrupted. And all of those agencies progressed their own services significantly. I personally believe that the event sector needed transformation. It needed to be reinvented. It needed to have everyone relook at the way they were doing it because of the impact it has on the environment. And ultimately now, I think we all probably know this, but the rest of our lives now, events will always have the choice of being streamed live or in person, and won't have the carbon footprint that it had before. So yes, some were affected badly, but people went to survival mode. That survival mode created real benefits. There were more shifts to online, to new areas. Obviously, one of the biggest demands that had come from the agency sector, from all of the agency surveys, when people in agencies were surveyed, what was their number one benefit they would like to see their agency bring in? It was flexible working. And all of a sudden, we started to see more flexibility well, obviously we had to work remote, so there was no choice, but that created better trust between business leaders and employees, because that's always been the big issue with people not trusting their employees enough, but they had to do that. Agencies were wonderful because we have the technology, like technology businesses, to be able to very quickly move to online. But we also saw new channels explode. We saw TikTok, which last March, let's face it, wasn't used by anyone pretty much over the age of 14, suddenly reach a complete cross-section of demographic. And all of a sudden, we saw new platforms creep up on us, like towards the end of last year, like Clubhouse. And so all of a sudden, we're seeing new platforms, new technologies, and some real benefits into the agency space. But the behavior that was really important was the fact that agencies had to adapt to survive. And that thinking, I think, saved everybody. We started to see some other things. Because everyone was now online, there seemed to be a resurgence on agency leaders not hiding behind their agencies and starting to actually have to come out again and be visible for the people in their organization, to be visible about their plans for their company moving forwards. And those of you, most people here have probably come across when Gary Vaynerchuk did it with his agency VaynerMedia very early on, maybe in the sort of 2012 period. We saw in 2015, Stephen Bartlett realized that actually if he adopted a similar approach from a UK perspective, he could grow social chain globally in a much quicker, short period of time. And then more latterly, we have people like Carrie Rose of Rise at 7, who's built a multi-million-pound agency in just 20 months through developing their thought leadership. but we've also had to see people in the wider team now develop their opinions, their points of view, and start to make them more public. So here are 10 ways that I believe you can future-proof your career. The first one is always have a personal development plan. If you don't have a personal development plan, then you don't know where you're going. You're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to drift, you know? And whilst people will always laugh at me saying, have a 10-year plan, there's nothing wrong in sitting there saying, by the time I'm 30, 40, 50, I kind of would like my life to be a bit like this. You may not have all the details, but you certainly should be able to create a 1 to 3 and possibly even a 5-year plan. But don't just do it professionally, do it personally. You know, we talk about a work-life balance, but actually in reality, it's the integration of the fact that you work to earn money to fund your life experiences. So therefore, make sure that you try and align the two. Look at what your professional goals are, but also look at what your personal ambitions are. You know, where will you live? You know, what will your family look like? Where more details, what were your hobbies and interests? What things would you like to learn? Understand how your agency can support your short, medium, and long-term career goals. Hopefully, if you haven't got a way to take your PDP and talk to someone about that, make that happen. Because actually, if you can work that out, then I would like to think that most companies, and I know this because I sit on the boards of quite a few, have a budget line for training. And, and actually often it never gets used. At the end of the year, it's just sitting there and no one's using it. So take advantage. Go and find out if there is a training budget. Go and work out what training you could get that could then help your company that you're working for, that, help you to help your company basically with your career path and would help them and add value to them. You need to work out obviously what skills you need to progress. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. And, you've got to do whatever it takes then to try and come up with a way to execute that plan. And some people, they visualize. I mean, I've seen people mood boards their futures and, visualize it. There's people who manifest it. There's people who do daily affirmations. I don't really care how you do it, but it's really important to try and hard code what it is you want in your head. As a 16-year-old with no qualifications, who's left home and living in a bedsit, closing my eyes and saying, by the time I'm 20, I bet I was only, I think, £70 to take home at the time a week. Saying, by the time I'm 20, I'd like to be earning £20,000, have a company car and have 2 holidays a year, which is £20,000, quite a lot of money to probably today's money, at least double, treble that. It was a really important part of me making sure that from a neuroscience perspective, my subconscious was constantly aware of what I was trying to achieve, and my actions then followed that. Or maybe I manifested it, I don't really know. But at the end of the day, it worked. If you struggle, to hold yourself to account, and we'll talk a bit more about accountability in a second, but don't look at things like the 5-minute journal. That's just spell check has changed journal to journey. Brilliant. 5-minute journal, which is a really great way for you to help keep a record of the things that work out each day. Because as you probably all know, often when you're working, sometimes more things go wrong than go right. And it is important that along your journey, you keep a record of all of the things that go right, so you can look back and reflect and know that you're actually making some progression. So integrate your work-life balance. Don't always think about it as a separate thing. Don't think, well, that's my work and that's my play. I think, there are ways to bring the two together. Enjoy your work. And then because work can be hard at times, enjoy your work, but have fun, but then make it a place where you can actually earn some money and go and create great personal life experiences. The purpose diagram on the left is what I use at every single point on my career when I want to understand where I went next. It was actually in a very old book called What Color's Your Parachute? And the first time I saw this, you see this today called Ikigai, which is the Japanese version of this. And even when I started my business up, I use, in fact, both businesses, I use this, and it is important to understand what you're good at, what can you get paid for, what do you love, what does the world need? And if you can get those things right on your career path, you're going to enjoy a lot more what you do. So number 2, now, next, and future. Some of you might recognize the guy on the left. His name's Mark Ritson, and the guy on the right is Gary Vaynerchuk. They're always having a battle with each other. Well, probably more so Mark on the left is having a go at Gary on the right. Mark is a defunct marketing professor, and Ritson, he believes that marketing strategy is in the now, with the channels, with the strategies now to solve the client's marketing problems. You know what? He's right. It is. Gary, he doesn't talk about the now, he talks about the next and the future. He's telling his clients what's next. He's telling them where they need to get in early, where they need to take advantage and understand new and emerging areas so that when they become critical mass, you can be in there earlier and be smarter and capitalize from it. Who's right? Well, I'll tell you what, I have an opinion. They're both right. You know, that one is not having a go at the other because he's wrong. The bottom line is Mark says, yeah, focus on the now, but everyone listening to this, for your career's sake, focus on the next and future too. Be that 22-year-old that I was, you know, sitting there with one eye on the future, not realizing that maybe e-commerce was going to ruin the high street, but certainly realizing that the internet was something that was going to change the world. And if I could be part of that, that would, you know, would benefit my career in the long term. Understand the digital marketing and advertising hype cycle, or et al. These kind of things exist for lots of areas. If you can find these hype cycles, which Gartner and other large consultancy companies organize, you'll start to see what the now is, and you'll start to see what the next is, and you'll get to see what the future is. And that way you can help yourself by learning what all of these things mean so that you're better prepared for the road ahead. So when it comes to now, next, future, how do you know what's the next and future? Well, you have to find some really good trusted sources. For me, I try and find mavens. Mavens are people who know things first. They seem to be like the psychics of business in certain areas. You know, they're the people that are talking already about blockchain and how it will change the world. They are the people who are talking about the you know, things that are emerging forwards that we are seeing becoming the new now. And so find out who these people are, what they're talking about. Find, you know, news sources. Understand where are you learning your trends from. Now, by the way, these trends may be innovation, but they can equally be, where is fashion next autumn winter 21-22? Where are the colors? What is the typography that's happening on Getty Futures? What's the future of photography? Where's that going? And you can start to look and see all of these things, because some people are planning a long way ahead what they're doing. I always remember when the Olympics logo came out, no one liked it because it was almost like 5-6 years ahead of when it needs to be. But by the time it arrived, it just felt perfect. And so remember those fads. Okay, like remember the things I showed you. If someone says to you today, well, that's just a fad, learn about it, because it's going to come in one day and it's going to be a really big thing. I think, honestly, out of 100 fads that I've come across, 99 are now in every single day life. And the only one that isn't is Google Glass. And I Googled it the other day, and it is actually used by people in business to business environments. And Apple is about to bring one out. It was just a timing issue. So, you know, understand where your sector and your clients' developments are as well. Where are their businesses going now, next, and future? You know, it's important that you understand that. I mean, the reason why that article was written, by the way, about is this the end of the account manager, is because account management had become such a reactive service that actually in many cases, account managers have stopped being proactive, stopped going in, understanding the client's strategies, objectives. They've disconnected themselves from board level strategic conversations, and you know, let the consultancy companies do that. And they're reacting to client budgets rather than going in and trying to get a seat around the table, understanding how could, you know, they tune in more to what's happening and then take ideas in that could be closely aligned to that. So and while doing all of that, work out the skills that you may need to progress. I came across a young lady called Jodie in an agency in Bournemouth. She was a receptionist in the agency when I first met her. 2 years later, she'd gone traveling. I went back into the agency. She'd returned as a junior account manager. One day I walked past her desk and she was doing a Udacity course on machine learning. And asking her what she was doing, she said, well, I think AI is going to be the future. So I decided to take this training course on machine learning. Now I looked at this book and it was incredible what she was writing and what she was learning and interpreting it. You know, she's now like a client service director, probably another 2-3 years later, and she has totally transformed her career from that receptionist to being basically a head of client services. But she's also been very smart and invested all of her knowledge at the time in digital transformation so that she could go into the more innovation-based agencies and show a demonstration of how technology is moving. So there's a really nice example there. So 3, always be learning. And maybe that comes on from the last story about Jodie as an example. Sort of, you know, my hero in life was a guy called Jim Rohn, who basically used to write a lot of motivational books when I was younger. I needed a bit of motivation. He once said, all leaders are readers, and it couldn't be a truer statement. I don't think I know a leader who isn't a great reader. And of course, look, we all read stuff all the time and we're on content overkill. And then you see headlines like this: if you're not spending 5 hours a week learning, you're being irresponsible. But actually, the more that you know, the more that you realize how little you do know. And what I find too much when I go in to meet, you know, team members in agencies is people trying to pretend that they know everything because they have a fear of imposter syndrome and being caught out. But in fact, actually, you know, it wouldn't take long to just actually learn that stuff and just admit you don't know what you don't know. And so, you know, do what you can to create a career plan for the company. Okay, but you are not going to be at one agency for your whole life anymore. This isn't like the 1960s anymore, where you have one job and you're there for 80 years. Maybe 80 is an exaggeration, 60 years. But you know, you are going to be in different organizations. You know, hopefully you won't jump too much, and you're going to give each career a good run, because I think that's really important for career progression. But you know, make sure that you are investing for yourself in your time. I hear people all the time saying, I'm not doing that training because the company aren't providing me the time to do it. Well, maybe that is the case. Maybe the company training is for them and not for you. But you know what? Make time for you. Make time for you to learn more, because you're just going to future-proof your career path, and you know, wherever that may well be, and keep the value going. And of course, I don't have to teach you that there are podcast books and YouTube and fantastic training sites like Udemy and Udacity, and you know, there are events and webinars, but there's so much access to information. You know, if I go back to my agency days, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, it used to cost me between probably somewhere like 700 to £1,000 a day to train someone. You know, I can pick up, you know, 10 hours worth of training, you know, 20 hours, 200 hours worth of training now for you know, for less than £50 on some of these platforms. So, you know, do create times, but also just remember that not all career paths these days are management, you know, or leadership. Some career paths these days, and I would argue are more of a majority in the new next and the sort of now next and future of agencies, the next and future of agencies, they're much more meritocratic. They're much more about individuals improving themselves and their skills and their value, more than it is about how they're going to manage people and, you know, and organize them. The skills is more about how can I become an expert, you know, how can I be, you know, world class at what I do, rather than necessarily putting power and authority and other things into that career path. Number 4, define your personal brand. You be you. Don't do it the way Gary Vaynerchuk or Stephen Bartlett or Katie Leeson or Carrie Rose does it. Find your way to do it. Where can you be an authority? What thought leadership can you create or co-create with other people? Find your way to do this. There's a great book called A Key Person of Influence by Daniel Priestley. If you want a reference point, go read that book. But if you're able to get speaking events or panelists or write, a friend of mine, James Watley, who's ex-Ogilvy, and I don't know where he is now, he's gone to another agency, but he runs this fantastic email that he writes that people subscribe to every Friday. It's like 5 things on a Friday. And he's built a really big following up around it, where he talks about the things that he sees in his life that he's passionate about. I'm sure when he started that email, there was probably a dozen people on it, and today there'll be several hundred. So, what else could you do to define your personal brand? I mean, could you share information that you learn, doing lunch and learns internally? Could you become a key person of influence in the area that you're working in? But also do your own PR. I think one of the best things about the current generation of employees is that people are brilliant at spinning now. And they're really good at, kind of communicating what they do and what they're achieving in really, really impressive ways that sound amazing. So do your own PR, and try to raise up your personal profile. And the reason why I'm telling you this is important is because in a recent board meeting, we had two candidates apply for a job. Both had the same skills, both had the same, were a values fit, both seemed a culture fit, but one of them had a much greater presence on social media than the other. The other was making no effort on any channel, and the other person was making some effort on 2 or 3, including LinkedIn, was supporting that. We could see they were supporting their existing company LinkedIn. And that for us made a difference to take that person on, because that is something that a person would add more value to us than someone that is afraid to talk about their work on their social platforms. So Katie Leeson's a really good example potentially of someone who's done this. Stephen Bartlett was the founder of Social Chain, but then what followed was the leadership team and the people in the business started to find their own way. And Katie Leeson didn't have anything public 18 months ago, and within 12 months she became one of the sort of main LinkedIn authorities. And so LinkedIn, come with the references, but one of the people on LinkedIn who they then sort of stand out as one of the key people to follow as influencers. So it is worth you investing in personal brand, because it can add massive value to the founders of your agency or to the leaders in your agency if you're doing this. And if you are a leader, you should be doing this regardless. So number 5, understand how you can add value to your agency. This is a really sort of misunderstood thing. I think a lot of people think that sometimes by working hard, I'm a hard worker, I'm important to my agency, or, maybe my work is amazing, I'm really valuable to this agency. But it is worth asking, the people in your business, what does a valuable employee look like? For me, when I look at my people working in agencies, being really efficient, being creative, being 2 steps ahead. I'm going to read these out, not in order. The people in the teams that have great networks that can bring people in that could potentially become clients or help find new candidates. The people who help drive testimonials, help us win awards, all of these things add value. So understand how you can add value to your agency, and it will certainly, that's what's going to help your career. It's going to help you earn more money, because the more valuable you become, the more of an asset that you will need to be retained. Number 6, embrace the fads. Well, I've kind of told you to do this already. But I love this story from Ogilvy, and it was actually James Watley, who I mentioned before. He joined Ogilvy at one point. They moved to the new offices in South Bank, and apparently no one could find a meeting room. So he created a Facebook AI chatbot where people could ask, where is this meeting room? And then it would give them a little map and give them directions on how to get there. And he thought, wow, we can create AI chatbots now. I mean, we can argue whether a chatbot is AI, but let's go with it. And the next thing I know, he was telling me this story. And the next thing I know, I've opened the drum up, and then there's an article saying, Ogilvy pushes AI with bots. And so actually, if you can embrace the fads and you can understand them, and people in your team can help you potentially turn these into fame projects, they can actually turn into PR. They can turn into things that actually can help your business look like it is already looking. And then, now a lot of people will say, oh yeah, but you're just jumping on a bandwagon and things like, maybe, but the reality is so many of your clients, when the conversation comes up, we need to create ourselves an AI chatbot. Who do we know? Your clients are probably going to remember this if you've created it. So it's really, really a really nice way. But do embrace this. Don't listen to the negative people out there who are having a go, because You know, I think what's the one right now? I would say NFTs are probably the biggest fad right now, because we've now finally had someone buy a piece of art through it. Let me give you a prediction today. NFTs are going to crash and burn in about 2 years' time. And in about another 6 years' time, they're going to come back and be the biggest thing ever, right? That's what happens. So go home this weekend and take a photograph and turn it into a piece of NFT and take it into your agency. So to let you know, if anyone needs any help creating NFTs, I know how to do it now. Like, be the person who understands the next and future of services that your agency could provide. Yeah. And, you know, the NFT might not necessarily suit, because you may not be a creative agency. It could be a way of protecting a piece of IP that your agency has. It could be many different things, but there's probably a good example of it. Emotional intelligence, number 7. Understand your strengths and weaknesses when it comes to EQ. People with high empathy and self-awareness and EQ scores are statistically, I think it's over 80%, are more successful in life. You know, money isn't everything, right? We know that, okay? But at the end of the day, it is very, very important that you understand how you can get on with other people, how you can relate to people, but also being self-aware about how you act in certain situations, okay? So I jumped ahead then. Money isn't everything. Watch out for your ego. Basically, I think where EQ basically really comes in for me is, you know, there's been times in my career where I've thought I'm bloody brilliant, and I've jumped jobs because I think I'm really good and I'm worth more money and I'm, you know, more valuable. And I've jumped jobs. It's been a complete disaster, because my ego's got the better of me. My self-importance, I became overconfident. So watch out for that. Be self-aware. Taking a bigger role with more money doesn't always make you happy. Make sure that your career path, you know, think success first, the money will follow. Make your career successful first, the money will always follow. Accountability partners. Now, I think for me, this is probably one of the things that most of my successful friends, and I'll define success as they've achieved things beyond probably the expectations that were put on them when they were younger, and they've certainly become the best version of themselves that they probably could have been. I mean, maybe there's some that are still going to be better, but the people that I know, they've all found mentors that have trodden the path before them. And I mean the same path. Don't just find random mentors who've never done what you need to do or achieve what you want to achieve. Try and find as relevant as you can, because they'll give you much more accurate information. But find friends or colleagues that can hold you to account with your personal development plan. I had one client once where the person who worked on the sort of new business partnerships in the agency brought me their plan before a meeting once, showed it to me, and said, you know, this is what I want to achieve by the time I'm 35. And I want, every time you come to the board meeting, do you mind meeting me 15 minutes before, just to check that I'm still doing this? Because I know that if someone's checking up on me, I'm going to be held to account more. I'm not just going to get drift and not really care about it. And actually that person now got an amazingly senior role in Virgin somewhere, doing consultancy around the area that they showed me. So it did come true. And, you know, and remember that saying, you know, and it's actually Jim Rohn who said it first, the guy I mentioned earlier, you are the sum of the 5 closest friends. I think when it comes to your career and it comes to having accountability, if the people that are around, if you have I have a small circle of what I call let's call them my business friends, maybe more than my sort of family friends, but we're all really good mates. We all hold each other to account. When we tell each other what we're trying to do, no one mocks each other. We all support each other. And that group is a really great support group. And I've heard many different stories over the years of people organizing, you know, getting small groups together to help each other, hold each other to account. Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, I read the book by her husband, where he talks about how they had 3 or 4 other couples who were friends, and they used to every year meet up and share what their career goals were for the year ahead, and then they'd have to report back a year later. And you know, sometimes having that accountability around you might just stop you procrastinating or drifting away from actually, you know, trying to achieve some of the things that you really want to achieve. So last couple here, so I'll be quite quick. Remember, your network is your net worth. We know that over 70% of people in jobs get that job because of a referral. And, you know, there's no question that the more connections you have, not only will it help your career, but it will also probably help your ability to be able to, maybe bring in new recruits or maybe even new business into your agency if you've got good contacts. And, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't built a good network along the way. I have a warning on random connections because it's all too easy these days just to accept every single person that invites you to connect when you've got no personal connection with them. But make that choice. If you connect to randoms, that's fine, but understand the consequences will be that actually when you ask your network for things, and most people who see the requests are not going to be people who know you, and actually the algorithms may well filter out the people you know, so only the people you don't know see your posts. So I would say, for me, I know all my connections. If someone says to me, hey, could you help me introduce me to this person? Or if I need to ask that person a question, I know them and they'll probably help me out back. Understand reciprocity, understand the importance of helping others in your network first. Always help others in some way. Always ask people what their challenges are. Always do what you can. And if you want a great book to read on starting out networking, Dave Burkus wrote a book called Friend of a Friend, where he talks about how some of the biggest businesses in the world started by just school friends reconnecting. So finally, be an A player. When I go into agencies, they'll often talk about their team members as A, B, and C players, maybe sometimes a D player as well. But who are these A players and how do you become one? If you're in a team working for an agency and you don't know the answer to that question, then ask the leaders. Ask them, who are the A players? What are their behaviors? Ask them if you're considered an A player. And then, cross-reference some things like, do you actually live and breathe the company values and behaviors? Are they actually aligned to yours? Could you improve on it? So many people I know, they believe that they, exemplify the company's behaviors, but they don't. And they're not honest enough and brave enough to be able to admit that, or to even get somebody else to tell them the truth and say, just tell me the truth. I'm doing this. Don't just, don't just play lip service to me. So I think it's really, really important that, you want to become the best version of yourself. And tell you the other thing about A players is they don't know everything. I spoke to an agency founder a couple of weeks ago and said, I've got 3 leaders in my organization. And one of them is the best leader I've got. He works overseas. The team is the most efficient. They're absolutely brilliant. He spends most of his life admitting to me that he doesn't know what he's doing on a lot of things, but he's learning about it and he's going to find the solution. Whereas everybody else is trying to convince her, the leader, how great they are and how brilliant they are, yet their business units are failing time and time again. So be vulnerable, ignore the imposter syndrome, you know what you know, and admit you don't know what you don't know, and always be open to learn new things. So just a couple of other things. There's a lot of things I've mentioned in these 10 areas. So, don't be afraid to take some ownership, to time block some of these things if you think they're important to you. Try and remain one step ahead, not one step behind. And what I mean by that is, don't spend your time, always going to people in your business with problems. Find the solution. Say, look, there's a problem here, but I've got 3 ideas for solutions. What do you think about these? And try to anticipate what the business is going to need next. Although I sort of talked about meritocracy, businesses need great leaders. And so if you are to be a leader in the future, it's a really wise idea to go and learn about what is leadership. And there's some great stuff on YouTube. I found and I'm sure probably the more mature agency people who are here today may remember John Maxwell from the 80s and 90s. But if you go on YouTube and look up the name John Maxwell, you'll find hours and hours of great content, timeless content about how to become a great leader, how to get people that have to work for you to want to work for you, and actually, to do invest in that. And then I just want to end on one thing about an A player. I once had an employee of the month. She was an engineer in my team, and she won the Employee of the Month award something like 18 months in a row. And we had to scrap the scheme because basically she just won it every single month, and everyone was moaning that it was becoming really boring and not really having an impact on the business. And when I asked everyone, why did Sue May win the employee of the month every single month, it was because they said, she's just the most helpful person here. She's always supportive. She's always helping. And you know, so help those colleagues around you, be that person, and it will transform the way you are perceived in your organization. So have fun, stay foolish, be creative, be brilliant, and be innovative to make sure that you future-proof what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spencer. Absolutely
I
brilliant.
overran my
Really,
time
really
by about 10 minutes. I know,
No,
sorry.
I was hanging on to every word. I literally got pages and pages of notes. So it was, yes, super valuable. And yeah, I'm really going to look over these notes and start implementing some of the things over there. I've got a quick question before we open up to everyone else. So it's a big one. What do you think the next fad will be that'll be impacting agencies?
So I think that obviously there's so many different agencies that do different services. So I think what's really obvious, what is obvious is whichever agency you are, there is almost a different future ahead. You know, certainly when I talk to, you know, as an example, recently, you know, we've seen PR companies and SEO companies converge because all of a sudden, you know, PR has become much more online, and we know that the more online content there is, that improves the ability to search and find a company. So I think we're going to see a lot of convergence of technologies. Individually, there are still things that haven't matured. We still haven't seen augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality become mainstream. The technology is still a little bit cumbersome, you know. We've still not really seen, you know, where platforms are going to develop. You know, cryptocurrencies, you know, they're in a massive sinkhole at the moment, but, you know, 6 months ago, they were looking like it was going to be the future. Blockchain technology is finding its way through. And I think, you know, actually around delivering services, I could actually see blockchain becoming a really key part of the integrity and the checking mechanism between, you know, providing services and delivering them and being able to check that off. But I think it is a really big question to ask. I mean, there are certainly, you know, for me, I think that the NFT side of things is very, very interesting because I know it's a fad, but it's very early. But I think we're going to see some very interesting areas around there, especially around protecting IP methodologies and finding ways to protect assets using that technology. So, yeah. What else? What else would I say? I think the one thing that we can be assured of is that, you know, when I look at my 16-year-old son, you know, he doesn't use Facebook. He does use Instagram a little bit, but it was mainly all YouTube and Snapchat. And I think that actually, you know, we've seen the likes of Twitch and the sort of more gamer-based social media networks starting to gain pace. But I think we're going to see, you know, that generation coming through. Actually, we're already starting to see it. In some ways, I'm seeing the Gen Zs working harder than the previous generation. I see them university seems becoming less important because they know they've got access to information online, so they can do their own self-learning, their own become experts in areas. I'm starting to see more people start their businesses earlier than ever, which I'm not sure is always a good thing. I think there's still, you know, a worry about the lack of experience and understanding the pressures that can bring. But yeah, it's a really big question. I probably didn't answer that at all. I probably just dodged my way around lots of areas. But I think, you know, give me an area, anyone, and I'll probably be able to tell you in about 20 minutes roughly where I'd see that going and progressing.
Okay, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, I want to jump in quickly. First of all, cheers for the talk, Spencer. I took a lot of points from it for myself, especially being inside of that Generation Z category myself. So,
are you a hard worker, Martin?
I would believe so. You could ask the team about that one. I'm sure they'll tell you. I'm confident that I am. Yes. So
I'm not saying that hard work's a good thing, by the way. But I just have noticed a different work ethic with some of the super younger people joining the workforce now. That's all.
Yeah, cool. The question I had was going back a little bit to the middle of the presentation, talking about quite heavily of the future being, and for myself, the future being a big talking point. Are you worried at all that tech development will hit a peak and the barrier of entry for a certain skill, or let's say, for example, a creator who wants to start a business around a new tool, they're trying to, because I can't speak for the early 2000s and that sort of development time frame because I was a toddler, so I can't speak too much on that one. But we've seen the massive acceleration over the last 10 years of tools, services, skill sets being developed massively, quite very highly. Is there a peak to that? And do you think the education and the skills behind that are going to be harder to obtain, especially for younger people?
Well, I think to answer the question, I think that coding and engineering has definitely gone up the value chain, because now that, they are, as you know, a lot of the people now focusing on what we almost call DevOps, where they're now doing more development, which is basically involved with more cloud computing, and all of the cloud platforms all have artificial intelligence built into them. But actually, if you take the example of, like, maybe for me, I needed engineers to build websites. You don't need engineers to build websites anymore, So actually, the web developers that are today building websites, I actually only saw 5 agencies personally almost go out of business last year. In fact, a couple did. They kind of merged into other businesses. They were all WordPress agencies. So, and engineers don't really need to be building WordPress sites anymore. Those guys are moving up the chain, and the WordPress market is going down into Wix and Squarespace. And it's like, our website was built in WordPress into the year 2011 when we started. In 2019, we moved it to Squarespace as a business. So, those engineers definitely are not in demand anymore. So I would say it's just a repositioning of the skills higher up the value chain, in line with what I said. There's always been a skill shortage in developers. I do think development's getting smarter about AI writing code now, and starting to get AI to actually write code and actually do more developers' work, and that will help as well. So, but let's be really honest. There is a big skill shortage right now. Everyone's feeling the pain. Technology organizations are scaling so quickly. They're taking a lot of that resource, especially in many cases, away from agencies. And so it is a real challenge right now, resource, especially around engineering. And I don't think there's enough role models. I wanted my daughter to be an engineer, and I tried really hard because she's a good maths geek, and she's also, she did design technology. But there's just no role models for her. None of her friends are doing it. There was no one really at the school that was inspirational. And so I think, there still needs to be a little bit more work done at grassroots level to make sure there's more diversity in engineering. I mean, I know people have been trying really hard, and they are doing a great job, especially in the States, but there's still much more to do there as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Anybody
Any
else?
more questions? Anyone?
They're all exhausted. They're all worn out.
No, I think there was just so much value in it that people are probably going through their notes at the moment. It's so good. So thank you so much for that. And thanks for the affirmation, actually, because some of the stuff that you spoke about have been Green Jam topics.
Oh, really?
So we did creativity and coding a couple of weeks ago, and then we had a focus on gaming in our industry. So yeah, pretty much on point. So thank you so much. So thanks again, Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, actually, on that point, I mean, Kyan, obviously, are a client of mine who did that talk, and they've had no problems recruiting engineers. They've actually done it really well. But it just goes to show engineers like working with other good engineers. So I think that is another really important consideration. If you are to attract good talent in a business, you've got to have good talent there as well to attract more good talent. So, but yeah, I'm glad I covered some topics that were quite relevant. What did you do on affirmations, Terry?
We've just passed 2 minutes past 6 o'clock, so we're just over time. But thanks everyone for joining us. Our next one is on the 13th, I think, of July, is it? And we are talking about the future of IFSS in marketing. So please join us for that one. But thank you very much, everyone.